There is a silent truth at the center of our being. We cannot give what we do not first hold within ourselves. Many of us chase approval, cling to relationships, or bend ourselves into shapes we were never meant to take, hoping to be loved, seen, or valued. Yet, paradoxically, it is only when we begin to love ourselves, truly, deeply, and without condition, that life responds in kind. When this happens, something remarkable occurs. Only those who deserve our light arrive, while those who cannot honor it quietly fade away. When we speak of love, we often imagine it as something that flows between people, as though it were a currency to be traded or a flame that must be borrowed from another's fire. Yet the deepest paradox of love is this: we can only offer to the world what we first cultivate within ourselves. Without self-love, our longing for connection becomes a plea, a hunger, an endless reaching for something we believe another must provide. When we recognize our own worth, the dynamic shifts. We no longer beg to be seen or fight to be chosen. We arrive already whole, and our presence becomes an offering rather than a request. Imagine for a moment two people standing face to face, each with an empty vessel in hand. They look into each other's eyes, waiting, hoping, pleading silently, "Fill me, give me the water I lack, quench the thirst I cannot satisfy within myself." But both vessels remain empty, and so both leave disappointed, convinced perhaps that the other failed them. Now imagine again two people stand together, but this time one arrives with a cup already brimming. Their fullness spills naturally into the space between them. They do not demand, they share. And if the other also arrives full, then their meeting is not a desperate exchange, but a dance of abundance. This is the image of authentic relationship. It is born not from scarcity, but from two souls who know their worth and therefore meet in freedom. In our daily lives, we see this truth unfold quietly, though we may not always recognize it. Consider the friend who, for years, has bent themselves into shapes they were never meant to take, agreeing always, pleasing always, afraid that any hint of resistance might cause rejection. At first, others may reward this compliance. They are praised for being agreeable, easy, selfless. Yet underneath, resentment brews. Over time, the friend begins to notice their exhaustion. Something within them whispers that this is not love, but dependence disguised as kindness. When at last they discover self-respect and begin to assert it, declining invitations when tired, voicing their true opinions without fear, showing up as they are rather than as they think they should be, their world changes. Some relationships weaken, even collapse, because they were never built on truth, but on the fragile scaffolding of need. Yet the friendships that remain grow deeper, richer, sturdier. Those who stay are not those who required a mask, but those who can bear the face of authenticity. Romantic partnerships provide another mirror. Many of us enter love not from fullness but from emptiness, searching for someone to complete us, to rescue us from the silence of our own loneliness. We may pour ourselves endlessly into the other, hoping they will fill the void. But a relationship born of desperation carries within it the seeds of collapse. One cannot live forever as half a person seeking completion in another. Eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. Yet when two individuals, each rooted in self-love, come together, the bond is of a different nature. They do not need one another to survive, but choose one another to grow. They do not fear abandonment, for their sense of worth is not dependent on the other's gaze. Instead, their love becomes a sacred space where two complete beings can create something larger than themselves. This is not a romantic idealization, but a psychological necessity. The psyche cannot sustain the endless strain of self-denial. It rebels in subtle ways, through resentment, through passive withdrawal, through the gnawing anxiety that whispers we are unworthy. Self Love is not the loud declaration of superiority, but the quiet acceptance of our humanity with all its strengths and wounds. When we hold ourselves with compassion, we relieve others of the impossible task of healing us. And in doing so, we invite them to meet us as equals. Modern research supports what ancient wisdom already knew. Studies on self-compassion have shown that individuals who treat themselves with kindness rather than harsh judgment are more resilient in relationships. They are less likely to tolerate abuse, more likely to forgive mistakes, and more capable of maintaining intimacy over time. This is because self-love is not a shield against others, but a foundation beneath us. Without it, the slightest tremor can cause collapse. With it, we become steady enough to weather storms. To love oneself is also to recognize one's shadow, the hidden, unacknowledged parts of the psyche. Many relationships falter because we project this shadow onto others, demanding from them what we have refused to face within ourselves. For example, the person who secretly feels inadequate may constantly seek validation from their partner, creating endless pressure. Or the one who represses anger may find themselves inexplicably irritated by the smallest flaws in a friend, never realizing they are confronting their own denied emotions. Self-love requires us to integrate these shadows, to embrace the parts of ourselves we once rejected. Only then can we approach others without turning them into screens for our unresolved pain. There is a quiet liberation in this. When you begin to love yourself, you no longer enter a room scanning for signs that you belong. You carry belonging within you. You do not ask silently, "Am I enough for them?" Instead, you stand in the knowledge that your worth is not contingent upon anyone's approval. And paradoxically, it is often in this state of inner assurance that the deepest and truest connections form. Others sense it. They are drawn not to your need but to your wholeness. Your very being communicates, "I do not require you to complete me, but I welcome you to walk with me." Think of the oak tree. It does not beg the birds to build their nests or the travelers to rest in its shade. It simply grows, rooted deeply in the soil, stretching confidently toward the sun. Its strength and fullness invite life to gather around it. Some will come and go, some will stay for a season, but the tree remains itself, steady, dignified, alive. So it is with us when we root ourselves in self-love. We become a presence that nourishes without losing itself, that gives without becoming depleted, that receives without becoming enslaved. To live this way is not to live without struggle. There will always be moments when doubt whispers, when old wounds ache, when we are tempted to shrink in order to be accepted. But self-love is not a destination reached once and for all. It is a daily practice, a repeated choosing of truth over illusion. And each time we choose it, our relationships grow more authentic. We filter out the false, the dependent, the exploitative, and we magnetize those who recognize our light and wish to walk beside it. Thus, the foundation of all authentic connection is not found in the desperate reaching for another, but in the turning inward to embrace oneself. From this soil grows the only love that can last, the love that is shared freely, not demanded, that is rooted in truth, not fear, that flourishes not because two people are incomplete, but because each has chosen to meet as whole. There is a quiet misunderstanding in the world about the nature of love for oneself. Many assume that to love oneself is to indulge, to soften into comfort, to shield oneself from effort or responsibility. But true self-love is not indulgence. It is discipline. It is the fierce willingness to stand guard at the gates of one's soul and decide what is permitted to enter and what must remain outside. It is the courage to utter the small but difficult word, no, when something threatens to diminish our dignity, and the wisdom to say yes, when something calls us into greater life. In this way, self-love becomes less of a feeling and more of a practice, one enacted daily through boundaries. Boundaries are not walls erected to keep the world away, but thresholds that determine the sacred shape of our lives. To live without boundaries is to scatter our energy in 1,000 directions, to give ourselves away piecemeal until nothing remains. To live with boundaries is to gather the pieces, to weave them together into something whole, something luminous. When we speak of protecting our inner light, this is what we mean, not that the world is an enemy, but that our flame requires shelter if it is to burn steadily. Consider the life of the one who never refuses. They are admired in the office, praised as dependable, the one who will stay late when others leave, who will shoulder the tasks that no one else wants. At home, they are the one who bends endlessly for the needs of family, friends, neighbors, always ready with a smile that hides the slow erosion of their spirit. Outwardly, such a person appears generous. Inwardly, they carry a fatigue that grows heavier with each unnoticed sacrifice. For generosity without boundaries is not generosity at all. It is a slow form of self-abandonment. It is giving not from fullness but from depletion, and what is given carries with it the bitterness of resentment, however carefully concealed. The moment such a person begins to draw lines, the world responds. They say, "No, I cannot stay late tonight." They admit, "I am tired and need to rest." They request, "I need help with this task, I cannot carry it alone." And suddenly the atmosphere shifts. Some recoil, for they had only valued this person's compliance, not their humanity. Others, however, recognize the dignity in this act and remain, grateful to know the person as they truly are. In this way, boundaries sift. They act as a filter, revealing which relationships thrive in authenticity and which survive only in exploitation. There is pain in this process, for to set a boundary is to risk displeasing others. The child within us, who once sought approval as a means of survival, trembles at the thought of rejection. We remember the times when a no led to punishment or withdrawal of affection, and so we have learned to comply in order to belong. But true belonging cannot be bought with the currency of self-betrayal. It emerges only when we stand in our truth and allow others to respond as they will. Boundaries, then, are not an act of cruelty but of honesty. They say, "This is who I am, this is what I can give, this is what I cannot. If you wish to know me here within these lines." Nature offers us countless mirrors of this truth. The shoreline is a boundary, and without it the sea would drown the land. The skin is a boundary, and without it the body would collapse into formlessness. Even the cell, the most basic unit of life, survives only because its membrane decides what may enter and what must remain outside. Boundaries are not unnatural, they are the condition of all life. Without them, nothing retains its shape. With them, the inner spark of being is protected long enough to grow, to flourish, to radiate outward in strength. It is tempting to believe that by saying yes to all demands we will be loved. But what kind of love is it that depends upon our exhaustion? To be valued only when we are endlessly available is not love, it is use. And use is the enemy of intimacy. The people who truly see us are not those who celebrate our self-erasure, but those who can honor the lines we draw. When we say, "I need to rest," and they respond with understanding, there we glimpse the contours of authentic relationship. When we say, "This violates my values," and they respect the boundary rather than resist it, there we discover who deserves our light. Boundaries are also invitations to others. They teach the world how to treat us, just as the fences of a garden instruct the passer-by where the sacred begins. Without these signals, others wander blindly, often trampling what is precious simply because they do not know its worth. To place a boundary is to announce, "Here is something of value. Treat it with care, or do not enter." In this way, we protect not only ourselves but also the integrity of the relationships that matter most. Yet setting boundaries requires a discipline of the inner life, for often it is not the world that resists them most fiercely, but our own guilt. How easily the mind whispers, "You are selfish for refusing." How quickly the heart fears, "They will abandon me if I do not comply." But guilt is often nothing more than the echo of old patterns, the residue of a time when we equated love with obedience. To overcome this guilt, one must listen deeper beyond the noise of fear, to the quiet voice that says, "Your light is worthy of protection. Without it, nothing you give will carry truth." There is a paradox here. The stronger our boundaries, the freer our love becomes. For when we know what we can and cannot give, we no longer offer ourselves in fragments. We offer from a place of integrity, of wholeness. Our yes becomes powerful because it is chosen, not coerced. Our no becomes sacred because it preserves the space in which our soul can breathe. And in this rhythm of yes and no, of openness and closure, of giving and protecting, we find the pulse of authentic life. So we must learn to see boundaries not as limitations but as the architecture of freedom. Just as a cathedral requires walls to hold its form, so too does the soul require boundaries to house its light. Without them we collapse into chaos, scattered in 1,000 directions, consumed by the endless demands of others. With them we become steady, luminous, capable of shining without being extinguished. And though it may seem that boundaries will drive people away, in truth they draw the right people nearer. Those who cannot honor them fall away, as leaves fall in autumn, making space for the new. Those who remain are the ones who see not only the light we offer, but also the care with which we protect it. And in that recognition, a different kind of love begins to grow. Not the love of use or compliance, but the love of truth, mutuality, and respect. The world is not silent. It responds to us in countless ways, often more subtle than words, and often more honest than the masks people wear. There is a mirror in life that reflects not only the way we act, but the way we carry ourselves at the deepest level of being. It is not simply what we do that others perceive, but what we radiate, and what we radiate is shaped by the degree to which we love ourselves. When we walk into a room with shoulders bowed and eyes lowered, as though apologizing for occupying even the smallest measure of space, we are unconsciously instructing others how to treat us. The message is silent but clear. I do not deserve to be here. I am lesser. I am unworthy. And the world, like an obedient mirror, reflects this back. Others may overlook us, dismiss our ideas, or fail to recognize our presence, not because they have made an objective judgment of our worth, but because we ourselves have broadcast the signal of smallness. Yet when we arrive in quiet confidence, not in arrogance, which is the mask of insecurity, but in true presence, we send a different message. I honor myself, and you must too. This message does not need to be shouted. It does not require grand gestures, titles, or performances. It is something felt in the subtle rhythm of our being, a kind of resonance that communicates dignity before we ever speak a word. People sense it, often unconsciously, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. Respect begets respect, and the root of that respect begins within. Modern science has begun to capture in data what wisdom traditions have always known. Studies in social psychology reveal that individuals who practice self-compassion Passion and confidence are consistently perceived as more competent, trustworthy, and attractive. This effect has nothing to do with the shape of the body or the symmetry of the face. It emerges from the energy one carries, the quiet assurance that one is enough, that one belongs, that one does not need to apologize for existing. Self-love is magnetic, not because it manipulates others, but because it reminds them of their own longing for wholeness. People are drawn to it because it embodies something they too wish to claim. Think of the leaders you have admired, not the ones who commanded obedience through fear or force, but the ones whose very presence inspired trust. They may not have spoken loudly, but when they spoke, their words carried weight. They may not have needed to prove themselves, because their very posture revealed a harmony within. Such figures attract loyalty not because they demand it, but because they embody it. Their self-respect becomes a mirror in which others recognize the possibility of their own dignity. In daily life, we see this principle unfold in the simplest of encounters. A person who loves themselves enters a negotiation, a workplace, or a friendship without the constant need to defend or to beg. They do not rush to agree simply to be liked, nor do they dominate to avoid vulnerability. They stand steady in the middle, firm in their values, open in their heart. Others sense this steadiness and respond with greater respect. Even in moments of disagreement, there is recognition. Here is someone who knows their worth. The absence of self-love creates the opposite effect. A person who secretly believes they are unworthy may overcompensate by seeking to impress, performing endlessly, sacrificing their own needs in order to secure approval. On the surface, they may appear successful, even admired, but underneath there is a current of unease. Others sense this as well. They may take advantage of it, exploiting the person's eagerness to please, or they may feel a subtle dissonance that prevents true trust from forming. Respect cannot grow where self-respect is absent, for the soil is too unstable to sustain it. Self-love is not about pride, nor about elevating oneself above others. True self-love is humility in its highest form, for it acknowledges both our limits and our gifts. It is to say, I am not perfect, but I am worthy. I carry flaws, but I am not defined by them. I have strengths, but they do not make me superior to others. This balanced stance communicates authenticity. People instinctively respect authenticity because it carries no hidden agenda. To stand in one's truth is to offer others a place where they too can stand without fear of judgment. There is an archetypal image here, as though each of us carries a light within. When we doubt ourselves, we place a shroud over the flame. We dim our own glow out of fear that it might not be welcome, or that it might draw unwanted attention. But when we love ourselves, we remove the covering. We allow the light to shine naturally, not forcing it brighter than it is, not dimming it to suit the shadows of others. And in that radiance, people who recognize the beauty of light are drawn closer, while those who are threatened by it often retreat. This is the natural sifting process of life. We can see this in relationships. Consider the person who constantly apologizes, apologizing for being late, apologizing for speaking, apologizing even for existing. Over time, those around them begin to see them through the lens of apology. Their voice carries less weight. Their presence is overlooked, not because they are truly less valuable, but because they have unconsciously invited others to see them as such. Now imagine the same person learning to honor themselves, speaking without apology, claiming space with quiet confidence. Suddenly, the same people who once ignored them begin to listen differently. Their words have not changed, but their energy has, and the world mirrors it back. There is also a spiritual law at work. The outer world often organizes itself around the inner stance we hold. When we live in fear of disrespect, we encounter it often. When we live in expectation of dignity, it finds us. This does not mean life is without conflict, but it does mean that we are met more often at the level we have chosen for ourselves. In a sense, every encounter is a negotiation of worth. If we arrive already convinced of our own value, others have little room to argue. Of course, this path is not easy. To honor oneself requires confronting the inner critic, the voice that insists we are unworthy, that whispers we must prove ourselves endlessly or shrink into silence. This voice is not our essence, but the echo of old wounds, of messages absorbed from family, culture, or society. To practice self-love is to gently but firmly confront this voice, to say, "You are not my truth. I am enough." Each time we do, our inner stance shifts, and the world gradually responds in kind. Respect begins within. It radiates outward like ripples in a pond, shaping the way others see us, the way opportunities approach us, the way relationships unfold. The mirror of life cannot help but reflect what we carry, and so, if we wish to be treated with dignity, we must first bestow it upon ourselves. If we long for respect, we must plant its seed within our own hearts. If we desire love, we must cultivate it in the soil of our own being. The paradox is simple yet profound. When we carry self-love, we need not chase respect, for it arrives naturally. And when it arrives, it does not feel like flattery or performance, but like recognition, the world acknowledging what we have already claimed as true. One of the deepest and most persistent fears woven into the fabric of the human heart is the fear of losing people. From the earliest days of childhood, we are shaped by the dread of abandonment. As infants, our very survival depends upon connection, and so the psyche learns that loss equals danger. This early imprint lingers within us long after we are grown. As adults, we often cling to relationships not because they nourish us, but because we fear what their absence might mean. We tell ourselves it is better to keep the familiar, even if it wounds us, than to risk the loneliness that follows release. Yet life whispers a paradox we resist hearing. Sometimes loss is not failure, but sacred necessity. Sometimes loss is not punishment, but the filtering of what cannot belong to our becoming. When you begin to honor your worth, something extraordinary occurs. Those who once felt comfortable with your smaller self, the self that remained quiet, agreeable, self-effacing, may grow uneasy as you expand into truth. They may resist, withdraw, or criticize, not because you have done wrong, but because your light reveals the cracks in the bond. The relationship that depended on your silence cannot withstand your voice. The friendship that thrived on your compliance cannot tolerate your boundaries. And so, those who cannot resonate with your growth fall away. At first, this feels like failure. The heart aches, the old fear awakens, whispering, "You have driven them away, you are unlovable." But if you look more deeply, you will see that what has occurred is not rejection but revelation. The connection was never built to withstand your truth and self. Love merely illuminated what was already there. The image of metamorphosis offers us a profound symbol. The caterpillar cannot become the butterfly without dissolution. Within the cocoon, its body literally breaks down into fluid before reforming into wings. This is not a gentle process. It is messy, violent, unfamiliar. If the caterpillar clung to its old form, it would never fly. In the same way, self-love requires transformation. It requires shedding identities, behaviors, and often relationships that once felt like home, but now suffocate the soul. Those who remain in your life after this shedding are those who can meet the butterfly without asking it to return to the crawling world of the caterpillar. They are the ones who honor your growth because they, too, value truth over illusion. Loss, then, is not the evidence of your unworthiness, but the proof of your evolution. To lose what cannot support your expansion is to be freed, even if freedom feels like grief at first. Grief and liberation are often twin companions. The ache in the chest when someone leaves is real. It must be felt, honored, allowed to pass through the body. But beneath it lies a hidden gift, the clearing of space. Life is always trying to make room for what is aligned with our true nature, but it cannot do so until we release what is false. To cling is to suffocate the new. To let go is to allow the unfolding of destiny. We can see this pattern reflected in countless stories of human experience. The artist who begins to take their work seriously often loses friends who once mocked their creativity. The individual who commits to sobriety may find old drinking companions drifting away, uncomfortable with the new clarity. The person who learns to respect themselves enough to leave an unhealthy relationship may endure loneliness before discovering deeper love. In each case, the loss feels heavy, but it is also the turning of the soil, preparing it for a new planting. Without that rupture, there could be no growth. There is a psychological truth here as well. The psyche craves wholeness, and when we ignore this call, life has a way of stripping away what no longer serves it. Relationships that ask us to remain small, silent, or false begin to crack under the pressure of authenticity. The more we embrace our true self, the more we become a mirror to those around us. Some will see that mirror and rejoice, inspired to embrace their own truth. Others will turn away, unwilling to confront what it reveals. Their departure is not your failure, but their choice. They are not prepared to walk the path with you, and so they step aside. This too is sacred, for it ensures that your journey is accompanied only by those who can honor it. We often misinterpret filtering as rejection because we confuse presence with value. We assume that the people who remain are proof of our worth, and those who leave are proof of our lack. But presence does not always equal love, and absence does not always equal failure. Sometimes the ones who stay do so because they benefit from our diminishment, while the ones who leave make space for relationships that will one day honor us fully. It is not the quantity of people in our lives that measures our worth, but the quality of resonance between souls. Self-love ensures that those who remain are those who can truly walk beside us, not merely use us as a backdrop for their own needs. Think again of the forest. When autumn comes, the trees shed their leaves. To the casual observer, this might look like loss, a kind of dying. But the tree does not mourn its leaves, nor does it consider itself a failure for letting them fall. It understands that this shedding is necessary for survival, that it makes way for rest, renewal, and the eventual blossoming of spring. So too in our lives, when people fall away during seasons of growth, it is not a sign of death, but of preparation. It is nature's way of making space for new life, new connections, new forms of intimacy that are aligned with our evolving truth. To embrace this perspective requires courage. It asks us to lean into loneliness, to endure the silence that follows loss, without rushing to fill it with distractions or shallow replacements. It asks us to trust that the filtering process is wise, that life is not cruel but purposeful. The relationships that endure are those that can withstand the fire of transformation. The ones that burn away were never meant to carry us into the next chapter. If you find yourself in a season of loss, do not despair. Look more deeply, and you may see that what is being removed is precisely what would have hindered your unfolding. The pain of loss is real, but so too is the clarity it brings. You are not failing when people leave. You are discovering who is truly meant to walk with you, and that discovery, though it may cost tears, is ultimately a blessing. The path of self-love is not always the path of addition, often it is the path of subtraction. But what remains after the filtering is pure, strong, and aligned with your truth. To lose what cannot honor your worth is to make space for what can. And in that sacred space, life brings to you not those who demand your diminishment, but those who celebrate your expansion. There is a great misunderstanding about love for oneself, as though to honor one's own being were an act of selfishness, a turning away from others, a retreat into isolation. Yet the opposite is true. When we learn to love ourselves, we do not diminish the love available to the world. We multiply it, for love, when authentic, is expansive. It is not a limited resource to be rationed, but a flame that grows stronger as it burns. True self-love is not selfish, it is contagious. It is a force that liberates others, because by embodying it, we offer silent permission for them to do the same. Human beings are creatures of mirrors. Much of what we know about ourselves comes not from solitary reflection, but from the gaze of others. As children, we looked to our parents, our teachers, our communities, to discover who we were allowed to be. If they frowned when we expressed joy, we learned to dim it. If they rewarded us for self-sacrifice, we learned to give until we were empty. The psyche, in its vulnerability, absorbed these signals and built its sense of self accordingly. Yet when we encounter someone who has reclaimed their worth, someone who no longer apologizes for their existence, it touches something deep within us. Their presence whispers, "See, it is possible to stand in your truth. You too are allowed." Thus, the practice of self-love does not remain contained within one's soul. It ripples outward, becoming a gift for all who witness it. Consider the parent who has learned this lesson. Many parents believe that to love their children means to sacrifice endlessly, to place their own needs at the bottom of the list until nothing remains. But children do not learn self-worth through words alone. They learn it by observing how their parents treat themselves. When a child sees their mother or father continually neglect their health, dismiss their passions, or surrender their boundaries, they absorb the message that love is equivalent to self-erasure. Yet, imagine the parent who instead demonstrates self-respect, who carves time for rest, who honors their own interests, who maintains dignity in the face of disrespect. The child watching this does not grow up believing that love is selfish, but that love begins within. They inherit not only the parent's care, but also their model of integrity, and in this way, self-love becomes the soil from which generational healing grows. The same principle applies in the realm of leadership. For too long, society has celebrated burnout as though it were a badge of honor. Leaders who work themselves into exhaustion are praised as dedicated, while those who pause to tend to their well-being are labeled weak. Yet what does such a model teach those who follow? It teaches that worth is measured by depletion, that exhaustion is the currency of value. A leader who embraces self-love disrupts this illusion. By caring for themselves, they demonstrate to their team that wholeness is not a luxury but a necessity. They reveal that rest is not laziness but wisdom, that boundaries are not barriers but structures that sustain life. Their example liberates others to imagine a different way of being, one where dignity and well-being are not sacrificed on the altar of productivity. In this way, self-love becomes revolutionary, reshaping cultures, families, and communities. There is also a subtler dimension, one that unfolds in ordinary encounters. Imagine meeting someone who radiates ease in their own skin. They do not boast, nor do they belittle themselves. They simply are, unashamedly. Something about their presence makes you breathe easier. You feel less pressure to perform, less urgency to prove yourself. Their self-acceptance creates an invisible field in which you, too, are allowed to be authentic. This is the liberating power of self-love. It dissolves the silent contracts of judgment and comparison, replacing them with an atmosphere of freedom. One person's courage to stand in their truth becomes the seed of courage in another. Psychology teaches us that behaviors are often modeled more than they are taught. We can recite endless instructions to our children, our colleagues, our friends, but it is the way we live that imprints itself upon them most deeply. To proclaim "you must love yourself" carries little weight if we ourselves live in self-contempt, but when we embody self-love, we do not need to preach it. Our being communicates it more powerfully than words ever could. This is why self-love is contagious. It bypasses the intellect and speaks directly to the soul. The archetype of the beacon is a fitting image. A lighthouse does not run into the waves to drag ships to shore. It does not chase after those who are lost. It simply stands steady and luminous, declaring by its very presence, "Here I am, here is safety, here is guidance." Ships are drawn to it not because it demands them, but because its light makes the path visible. In the same way, when we learn to love ourselves, we do not need to convince others to honor themselves. We need only shine, and in our shining, others see what is possible. This principle explains why certain figures throughout history have sparked movements of transformation not by force, but by authenticity. Think of those who lived in alignment with their truth, even at great personal cost. Their integrity became a mirror in which entire communities recognized their own hidden strength. Such is the power of self-love lived openly. It awakens the dormant dignity in others, calling it forth as if from sleep. But we must also recognize the shadow side of this truth. Just as our self-love liberates others, our self-neglect imprisons them. When we remain trapped in cycles of self-betrayal, we unintentionally teach others that such betrayal is acceptable. When we allow disrespect to persist in our lives, we signal to those watching, children, friends, partners, that disrespect is to be endured. Our refusal to honor ourselves does not remain private. It ripples outward, perpetuating patterns of diminishment. Thus, the responsibility of self-love is not only personal but collective. To love ourselves is to break chains, to end cycles, to open doors for others who may not yet know how to open them on their own. There is a deep paradox here. Many fear that to focus on the self is to turn away from others. Yet the truth is that self-love is the most profound gift we can give to those around us. It ensures that when we offer love, it comes from abundance rather than need, from authenticity rather than performance. It ensures that our relationships are not rooted in manipulation or sacrifice, but in freedom. And it ensures that our lives radiate a presence that invites others not into bondage, but into liberation. So when you choose to honor your worth, you are not only changing yourself, you are changing the fabric of the world around you. You are creating a space where authenticity is safe, where dignity is normalized, where love is no longer confused with self-erasure. Your choice to love yourself becomes a silent revolution, echoing outward into the lives of all who encounter you. And though you may never see the full ripple of your influence, know that every act of self-love is also an act of liberation for you and for those whose hearts are waiting for permission to shine. To love yourself is not to build walls. It is to shine with such clarity that only those who can walk with you in truth will find their way to your side. The rest by nature will fall away. And so I leave you with this reminder: when you truly love yourself, only those who deserve your light arrive. Not because you pushed the others away, but because your very being has become a filter for authenticity. Choose to honor yourself and watch the world around you transform.